Hi, welcome to How to D&D. My name is Fred Wheeler and today I want to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5e and we're going to talk about the Monster Manual tactics that you can use in your game. And I've got a couple of monsters to present to you today. One is the T-Rex, the Crocodile, and I'm also going to present the Mimic and probably the Hydra as well. If there are any questions or monsters you want me to talk about, I will have a go if I feel I can. If I can answer to that question during the live stream, just put a note in there and I'll make a note and I'll come back to it later. So that is my plan anyway with today's particular live stream. I'm going to give you about an hour's worth of content and you can sort of pick through that. Look, if you're not present during the live stream, you can still put comments at the end of the video in the bottom, when it's uploaded to YouTube, and I will almost always answer those questions. The only time it doesn't generally happen is if I get really too busy and it takes me a little time to get to it, or for some reason it slips past me because YouTube doesn't notify me about absolutely everything sometimes, or it sort of just gets lost. So I don't know why they get lost, but sometimes they do. Occasionally there's been people who've asked me questions that I cannot fathom how to answer, and it's taken me a lot of research, or I've just like, I don't know how to deal with that. Give me just some time to think about it. Okay, so we're talking about Xanathar's Guide to Everything by the sounds of it. I'll let you guys keep doing that. I'm going to get on with actually talking about some monsters. And I thought I'd start with a bang. I'd start with the T-Rex, or the Tyrannosaurus Rex. It's on page 80 of the Monster Manual, and the stat block's very, very small. It looks very basic and simple to run. And you get a little bit of information on page 79, sort of talking about the T-Rex. Now, if you know anything about the T-Rex, what you'll realize is the research around the T-Rex and how they operated was utterly bizarre. It's not conclusive, it's mostly theory, and therefore hard to run in a game, because what is this monster supposed to do? How do they interact with it? What's the circumstances for that particular T-Rex? Okay, so what I want to do is I want to forward you to a website that I've been using. I've talked about it before, and it's called themonstersknow.com. Basically, he's done a whole lot of articles, written articles on monster tactics, and they're actually reasonable. They're not completely, I don't agree with everything that he's saying there, but I think it's worth having a look, particularly if you are struggling with trying to figure out how to run your monsters. So as I said, themonstersknow.com, that's on the web. You can look that up. One of the things I did notice with a lot of his monster tactics that he presents in there is he gets, I think, maybe the concept of intelligence and wisdom slightly confused. And the problem is, when you see the intelligence of a monster or a beast or a creature, and it's like 2 or 3, then you're assuming that it's stupid, okay? Now, that just means it hasn't learnt an awful lot of information. That's what intelligence is all about. And their ability to pick up new things. That's what intelligence is about. Wisdom is different. And often beasts, monsters, and other sorts of creatures have either a fairly average wisdom or quite a high wisdom. Although they have low intelligence, they have a high wisdom, and the T-Rex is one of those creatures. If you have a look, its intelligence is only 2, but it's got a wisdom of 12. That's above average. Average is 10. So it's not a stupid creature. And a lot of people have said over the years, well, but the T-Rex has got a small brain, and well, actually, there's a lot of research to suggest that's actually not the case. So I'm going to present you with a couple of ways of running the T-Rex in your game, and then you can decide how you're going to do it. Now, my first thought when I see these creatures, every time I've ever used a T-Rex, trying to get it to sneak up on the party and ambush them is like, it's impossible. It's such a large creature, trying to find something for it to hide behind. It doesn't have a particularly good stealth check. The modifier for doing a stealth check is like 0. That's it. Nothing else. 0. Okay? It's a flat roll. So it's probably not going to sneak up on its prey. What it does have as an advantage is actually really good perception. Now, if you have a look at the research on the T-Rex, they actually say that it picks up movement very, very well. Its ability to pick up movement, either side, very, very good. There's some research that says that it doesn't have very good vision, but there's other research suggesting that it has binocular. Okay, so it's got bi vision. That means it can see a long distance, almost as far as an eagle or a hawk. If that's the case, that means it can actually see enemies or food quite a long way off, which means it's not going to have a lot of trouble finding stuff. It's just the problem of getting to it. The other thing is that it's also got a really good sense of smell, and that's been proved by a few theories and a little bit of research. It's, they're dealing with bones, they can't get everything. So it's going to be able to find its creature. A ranger has one as a beast companion. A T-Rex is a beast companion. I hate to think a ranger with a beast companion, that's a T-Rex. Frightening. Okay, I wouldn't have been the dungeon master who would have let that go, but hey, anybody can run the game they want. Okay, so the first thing is it's got a really fast speed. It's 50 feet, so it can outrun most things, but it can't deal with things like antelope because they're running about the same speed, if not faster. But anything that's moving at sort of normalish speed, like 30 feet, it's going to be able to catch. It's only a matter of time. So that's where its advantage lies. It can run down its enemy or its food or its prey fairly efficiently. It's an apex predator in its environment, which means that essentially that it's usually the top dog. So how does it become the top dog? Well, it doesn't just go running, oh, there's something to eat, run straight towards it and then chomp. That's not really what it's going to be doing. What it's going to do is it will try to use cover, but it's not going to be very efficient. It is probably going to hunt in a pack. There's some research that sort of suggests, no, they were solo, they operated alone, but truthfully I think that the T-Rex works really good as a pack monster. Have 2 or 3. That's what I would do. You could have 1, but if you're coming across 1, it's probably just scavenging. The T-Rex was supposed to be a predator, but also in its environment and in history, it sort of suggested they couldn't catch a lot of things unless they were really slow, but it would scavenge. It would take food or prey off something that had already been killed, and it can deal with the smaller predators fairly efficiently. So you're probably only going to find 1 T-Rex when there is scavenging taking place. But when it's hunting, it's probably going to hunt in a group of 2 or more, in a pack. So that means it can come in from different angles, corner its creature, drive it into a location it can't escape from. That's what I would think that the T-Rex would actually do. Once it's done that, it's going to move in nice and close, and it's going to use that tail. Now, the tail would be the first thing I'd do. Then I would follow up with an attack. Supposedly, as the stat block has it, the tail attack has to be on a different target or different creature compared to the bite attack, which is fine, but I feel like that doesn't make an awful lot of sense, and it's fine if you want to sort of, okay, we'll lunch on one and the other one will just knock over. I don't understand that. I don't understand I understand it's such a large creature, maybe it can't tail attack and then flip around and bite it. I suppose that's what they're thinking. But for me as the Dungeon Master, and I would take a few liberties with this particular stat block, I would actually change things a little bit, just to make it a bit more interesting. So the first thing is, the bite attack allows you to grapple it with its teeth, and it also restrains it. Now, if you're dealing with multiple attackers trying to take out a T-Rex, and it manages to bite onto something and it's now got it in its mouth, I'd have that T-Rex run away with their food, because it can go quite a long distance. 50 feet if it disengages or dodges, or just dashes and take the opportunity attack if it's engaged in melee, and just run away. And there's not an awful lot that the party can do. It can just run off with its meal and then devour it at its own leisure. Okay? That's one of the ways you could deal with the T-Rex. The other one is, as I said, take liberties with the T-Rex and change some of the way and mechanics that this thing works. So the first thing I would say is allow the tail attack, if it hits, to knock the creature prone. Once the creature is prone, then I would follow up with a bite attack. because you're going to get advantage with anything that's prone, with your bite attack. Then it's restrained if you manage to get the bite in, and it's also grappled and restrained, and then you can, and as long as you allow both those attacks to take place on one creature, it can take down one creature and immobilize it fairly quickly. And then of course you can opt for using the strategy of run away with your food if you want to, or you can just allow it to do crushing damage each round and use the tail attack to smack the other party members around. So that's what I would suggest in terms of the T-Rex. That's what I usually try to do with my T-Rexes. I don't really like the stat block the way it is currently. Okay, we're going to move on to the next monster. Now, I am paying attention to the chat. If I don't respond to everything, it's just because I want to make sure the content's fairly keeps coming, keeps flowing. But if there is a monster you want me to talk about, or a beast or a creature, and I feel I can manage it, and I've had a lot of experience, I will do so. You just need to pop it up in the comments. So, we talked about that. Next one I think we'll talk about is the crocodile. I like the crocodile. I've used the crocodile quite a few times. I've probably used the giant crocodile more than the standard crocodile, but we will talk about the crocodile once I find my notes. Flipping pages. Okay, here we go. So the crocodile is on page 320. Cabal's after the crocodile. Yeah, that's fine. I've actually got some notes on the Cabal somewhere, and we can definitely talk about the Cabal. So, and I think I had talked about the Cabal last time anyway, but we can do that again. So page 320, which I'm just going to flip through to, so I have the stat block in front of me. So one of the things that when you're doing something like this is, you can't cut the video, can you? Oh, hang on, I've got to flip to a page. Can we just hold for a second? Right, I'm on page 320 now. So the crocodile is a really, really aggressive creature. And in fact, probably overly aggressive for its size, weight. It is a predator, but it's odd that it is so aggressive. And is that reflective of its intelligence or its wisdom? I don't think that it necessarily is. Its wisdom is pretty normal. It's just 10, okay? It's average. Its intelligence isn't very high, and that doesn't matter. But I would think that you'd use this player more as an ambush creature. More as a creature, like in the wild, they sit in the water and they wait for their prey. So they tend to hang around fresh water. They can tolerate salt water, some of them anyway, and they will they'll inhabit something like a river, a lake, wetlands, brackish water, streams, stuff like that, somewhere where other animals have to come to a water source to drink. That's the key thing with this particular monster or creature, is it's going to lay an ambush, and it can sit just below the surface with its nostrils protruding so it can breathe, and it just waits. It looks like a log, and they just float in. And usually if you've got one, you've got two. You might in fact have more than one. They tend to sort of hang around in the same location. They will tolerate each other, so it's not like they will fight amongst each other all the time. It's not the case. They will just hang out. They'll tolerate each other in the same feeding area, as long as there's enough space for them to maneuver. So it's an ambush creature, so you're going to be making stealth checks, and because it's below the surface and can go below the surface, it's going to be pretty hard to pick up. I would tend to give it an advantage, certainly not disadvantage on making a stealth check. It's really going to be hard to spot just because of the way that it's built. Its eyes are on top, nostrils at the top as well. So once the food or its prey moves to the water to drink, that's when it's going to move up as quietly as it can, and then pretty much just come out of the water and try to snap on. It's going to start off with using its clamping jaw. That's its main tool. As you can see, it can breathe underwater, which is fantastic. It can do that for about 15 minutes, so it can go under the surface and wait. But it's got a bite, and that bite allows it to not only grapple, it also restrains. Once it's restrained, guess what? Start dragging your prey back into the water. Okay? When you grapple something, you can move half your speed. So whatever speed is left over, move half your speed back towards the water. If it can get it into the water, it's at whatever it's trying to eat has got a huge disadvantage. And once you drag it completely in the water and you can get it under the water, then they're at disadvantage with their attacks, and also they're grappled and restrained, which is a really tough thing to deal with. Most crocodiles are not going to just bite onto something until it goes down and then bite onto another creature. It's going to bite onto something, drag it into its terrain, which is water, and then take it down to the bottom, flip it around a few times, drown that thing, and chomp away as much as it possibly can. Just crush it. That's usually how normal crocodiles operate, and I would just make your crocodile do exactly the same sort of thing. Crocodiles will also scavenge, so they will look for carrion. They'll certainly steal from other predators, so you can have that take place, or a situation where the party comes across a crocodile stealing prey from, or a kill from another predator. That's totally up to you though. They like to bask in the sun, so it's possible that because it's got cold blood, that you might see it resting on a small island or a rock or something like that, basking in the sun. It's another way they could sort of encounter it. If they start shooting at something like a crocodile, it's probably going to go into the water and find cover. It's not going to attack them if they've already attacked. It's usually going to go for getting surprised. So what you're aiming for is getting your crocodile to get surprised, so it gets that first attack. You mentioned huge disadvantage. Does the disadvantage stack? No, disadvantage does not stack, but the benefits are... Hang on, somebody is trying to call me and that's going away. All right. So the disadvantage is with their attacks. Not only do they have a disadvantage because they're trying to make attacks or trying to get out of that situation while they're underwater, if the crocodile can drag it under, they've also got to make checks to try to swim to the surface. That's what I mean by a huge disadvantage. Not only they're doing that, trying to get free of the crocodile, they've got to get to the surface. And with that, there's also constitution saving throws to be made, or constitution checks more likely, with regard to having to hold their breath, because they can be drowned. If they're held down there long enough, and it's usually between 2 and 3 minutes for most average-ish characters, that are going to start having to make checks before they start sort of suffocating, and you use the suffocating rules in that case. Okay, so I've already talked about grappling and talked about swimming and taking it down to the bottom. I've talked about... Now, how does a crocodile flee? If it starts getting hurt, it's not going to fight to the death. Crocodiles are smart enough to know that they don't fight to the death, but they will use disengage, and they'll probably use dodge too. They're not particularly dodgy though. I would say that they would probably just be hissing and snapping at something as it backs up back into the water. So that does mean that you can still move up to it and strike it, because on land they only move 20 feet. They're pretty slow. In the water they've got 30 feet. They can swim a lot faster. Everybody else who's swimming in water, who's like humanoid and part of the party, will only be swimming about half that speed, because they're going to get their speed halved when they're in water. So that is the crocodile. Okay. Next on my calendar, somebody talked about the Cabal, and I do believe I talked about the Cabal not so long ago. So I've got some notes here, which I wrote. Oh, here we go. And I'll make sure I flip it to the right page as well. That is on page 195. So if you open up your monster manual to page 195. Where are we? Here we go. Okay, so we get given two types of kobolds. Your standard kobold and the winged kobold. I'm going to talk about the standard kobold, because I think really when we start dealing with the winged kobold, its tactics are probably going to be fairly similar. The only difference is it can now fly, which means it can be up high and it can move around a lot more. It doesn't actually have to get into melee. In fact, trying to get into melee with a flying kobold, I just don't see why you would do that. Okay? Alright, so page 195 of the monster manual for the kobold. So the first thing to note is they are sensitive to light, sunlight in particular. So they're not really going to be trekking around in the daylight. they are going to hang out in dark locations, or they're going to move around during the hours when it's dark. That's the time that they would operate. They're also going to avoid sunlight. So if you move into an area which has got sunlight, they're probably not going to follow you. That would be my assessment of that situation. Kobolds love to set traps. So wherever they are, they're going to set a trap, ambush you. That's what they're fragile, so they can't really deal with just getting up and smashing you up close. Even though they have an ability called pack tactics. And this is what tends to mess people up a little bit. They see this pack tactics and they figure we just go into melee and start bashing. But they're so fragile, they wouldn't do that. They would use stealth, ambushes, traps. They're going to try to attack at range rather than in melee. And they're really only going to start using their melee attacks and getting in close is if you bridge the distance to them and force them into a situation where they have to fight up close. And once that happens, they're all just going to mill around and try to get in as close as they can, and they're probably going to go after one target so they get that pack tactics, that advantage on their attacks. Does that make sense? I certainly hope it does. I'm just looking at this and realizing that I actually have definitely done the Kobold. Terms of fleeing, I would tend to stick with, you can use just a move or dash or disengage or dodge. They're not stupid, they are capable of figuring that sort of thing out. They would tend to hang out with large monsters and creatures, so if they've got their own pet dragon, they won't be a pet dragon, they'll be worshipping the dragon, okay? But if they don't have their own dragon, they're going to be in a location that's hard for everybody else to navigate through. They're a lot smaller, they don't have to make the tunnels that big, they can make them a lot smaller. So that is the basics on the Cabal. I don't think I can go over that much more. I see there's a question from Jack. Where are you? You can answer this when you get finished, but can a player play a winged Kobold? I know using Volo's Guide you can as a regular Kobold, but it doesn't say anything about the winged Kobold variant. Well, if you're the Dungeon Master, you can allow that. But there's, even the Dungeon Master does not have to allow what's in Volo's Guide. Volo's Guide is another resource. It doesn't mean that every time that Wizards of the Coast pushes out another book or supplement that the Dungeon Master needs to allow that particular supplement in the game. So my advice to you is check with your Dungeon Master first. If they are happy for you to play a Kobold, great. If they are happy for you to play a winged Kobold, great. If they're not, that's just how it is. That would be my answer to that, Jack. Hopefully that answered your question. I don't know that it necessarily would be the answer that people want, though. So, moving on. I did talk about doing another monster. Where is it? I've done the Crocodile. I did the Rust monster last time we did this. I've done the... That's right. We were going to talk about the Hydra. I really want to talk about the Hydra. I like the Hydra a lot. And if I can just find my notes. Okay. So, drink of water. Now, the Hydra is on page 190 of the Monster Manual. So, hopefully I've been saying Monster Manual, not Player's Handbook or Dungeon Master's Guide, things like that. Okay, so there's a reasonable amount of information on the Hydra here. Now, if you have a look at themonstersknow.com, there are some instructions on how to run the Hydra. And to be fair, I don't really agree with his assessment of how to run the Hydra. I've never run my Hydra that way before. I'll tell you what he's got in his article. He suggests that the Hydra will try to engage the characters or the enemy, whatever it likes to eat. It's got 5 heads. It's got to eat, and it's got to eat a lot, and it just keeps eating in a location before everything, when everything's gone, it then moves on to a new location to feed. It has to eat a lot of food. It's a huge creature, so it consumes a lot. It's voracious in its appetite. So he's saying that this particular Hydra would move into the pack of adventurers or characters, and all the heads would attack a different target. And then if there's any heads left over because your party doesn't consist of 5 characters, then one of those heads would go after one of the characters, 2 heads. I've never done anything like that. It doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, I suppose you could do it that way, but there's no talk about how this Hydra is going to actually engage the player's characters. First of all, this thing has a land speed of 30 feet. It can swim 30 feet, so it's probably better off to be in water than on land. So I cannot imagine them coming across Hydra on land unless it's eaten everything in its current location and it's moving from one water source to another water source. It's probably the only time you'll ever see a Hydra just clambering, just slithering or walking across the land. The Hydra in the book has legs, but your traditional Hydra is essentially a serpent and it would just slither. Okay? I would say if the party are going to come across the Hydra, because it has a land speed that is essentially the same as most other creatures, it is not going to just go after stuff and chase things down. As soon as somebody sees this thing, it's large enough to spot, they're going to freak out and run away. And they'll be able to keep up their pace with this creature. The creature will never get into contact with them. They will just keep running until it's either got to run forever or it just gets bored, It doesn't make any sense. It'll never be able to catch anything. This thing has to ambush its prey. It's so terrifying and scary, and it's capable of sitting underwater for about an hour. So if you have a look, it says here, can hold its breath for 1 hour. So put it in a water source, a water location environment, have it be a water source that's drunk from often. So fresh water would be best, because then you've got deer and other animals coming to drink at the water. It means that your party might have to come to this location to fill up their canteens or cross water for whatever reason. It's going to be in a location where there's water. There's no reason why it can't sit below the surface, which means making a perception check to spot this thing. They won't be able to see it. They won't be able to detect it. They might be able to come to notice bubbles rising to the surface. That's probably the only indicator that the Hydra is in water. Once they get to the water, then it's going to come out and start attacking. And I don't think it would necessarily go for different targets. There's no reason why you can't have all 5 heads go after the same target and bite. Okay? That's its main tool. Really, it's got multi-attack. It gets 1 attack per head. It's got 5 heads, and it can wind up having more or less depending on how things go. And I would just have those heads biting the same target. If you find you've got more than 1 character tanking in the front, then maybe you can split those attacks up and have some of those attacks doing, maybe 2 heads on one defender and 3 heads on one of the fighters in the front line. It has reach, so it's got a 10-foot reach, which means it can reach over behind something in the front line and start chewing on stuff. So you can do that as well. So if they've been silly enough to put themselves too close to the front line, you can have your Hydra heads reach over and start biting somebody else, particularly if they look a little bit easier to actually deal with. Okay, so that is how I would deal with my Hydra. Now, the Hydra is not even remotely simple because it has multiple heads, and you can see the section on multiple heads is quite complicated. It states here that if you do at least 25 points of damage or more, 25 points of damage from a single blow, single attack, then you're going to kill one of the heads. Now, whether you describe that as being severed or whether it just dies because it just takes too much damage, it's up to you. But then what happens is once the head dies, provided this thing hasn't taken any fire damage and they don't have to apply the fire damage to that location, the game rules sort of suggest that you don't have to worry about that. You just, as long as it takes fire damage during that turn, then it can't regenerate more heads. So if you do fire damage, kill a head, okay, then you don't wind up with 2 heads springing up. But if you haven't done any fire damage, 2 heads are going to come up. So that could wind up being, instead of 5 heads, you now have 6 heads if you take out 1 head. That's the basic gist of this, which means the more heads, the more damage they do, potentially they could wind up with a creature with quite a few heads. And it's got a lot of hit points, so it can last quite a while. And it's got a reasonable armor class, so it makes it reasonably difficult to hit. Now there's another rule here, and it says here, reactive heads, okay? For each head the Hydra has beyond 1, it gets an extra reaction that it can use only for opportunity attacks. So that essentially means that if it's got 5 heads, you've got 5 opportunity attacks available to you. If it winds up with 6 heads, then you get 6 opportunity attacks available to you. It's really bad. It means that once anybody's close enough to be bitten by this thing, it can potentially do 5 or more, depending on how many heads, opportunity attacks. You have to disengage from this thing, otherwise it's going to hurt a lot, or dodge and try and make it a little bit harder. And don't forget, every head that it has, it's going to get an attack with that. So if it's got 6 heads, it gets 6 attacks. It's an awesome creature. It should be feared. I think it's a wonderful thing to put into a game. I've always put mine into watery locations, sometimes in a dungeon where they've got to wade through water, and it's deep enough that the Hydra could hide below the surface, or a lake, a watering hole, something like that. Always a nice place to stick things. Now, I haven't seen anybody chuck any monsters up here asking me for advice on any particular monsters, so I'm just going to flick through once I have a drink of water. That's glass 1 down. I'm going to start on glass 2 because when I do these things and I talk all the time, my voice just dies on me fast. Okay. All right. So, let us go to another favourite creature of mine. And I'm not even going to bother turning the page because this thing is renowned. It's also terrifying. It doesn't have a particularly high challenge rating. The Intellect Devera. Okay. I haven't used the Intellect Devera very often, but every time I've used it, it's always dawned on me just how horrible the circumstance is when you put an Intellect Devera into your game. And if you were to apply more than one Intellect Devera, it just gets much worse. So this is on page 191, and the Intellect Devera doesn't have a very high armor class. It essentially is a very low challenge rating. It's only 2. It's got maybe enough hit points to last 1 round or 2 rounds against a party of level 1, level 2 characters. Essentially, it's not going to live very long. So whatever it does, it's got to get inside somebody's noggin really fast. Otherwise, it's dead. It isn't going to survive. So it really needs to have surprise. And if you'll notice, it does have a dex modifier, and it does have stealth as a proficiency. Okay, so you get a +4. So make sure you place this thing in a location where it's got stealth so it can sneak up. Don't go after a whole group. Try to find something that is moved away from the party on its own, and then it sort of sneaks up on them and then tries to replace their brain. That's really what you're after, is trying to replace the brain. So it can detect sentience up to 300 feet. So finding something isn't going to be a problem. It's not obviously going to be using its eyes because it's got no eyes. It's got blind sense. So that's blind sight. So use that. It's got a pretty, it's above average passive check, passive perception. So what you want to do is get this thing up there and start trying to go with the body thief. This is the ability you want to be using. It's far more interesting than trying to use its claws. No, it's not going to last very long. Forget about it. It does what? 7 points of damage on average, and it might hit the thing? No, you want to be going for actually replacing the brain. So use the body thief ability. Much more sensible than using any of the other abilities. I mean, I suppose it could, but I would only do that if you have more than one Intellect Devourer, and I would tend to use more than one myself. I don't think it's necessary that you would say that this is a solo creature that would only move around on its own. So one of the things I've got to say about the body thief is it's quite involved. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail because this isn't really about the mechanics of it. It's about the tactics and what you would use in your game. All right, now there was a question that had come up. Jack, what have you got here? I can't think of the name. I'm pretty sure it starts with E, but he kind of looks like Hercules. Hercules. An E in Hercules. We're talking about a monster, aren't we, Jack? Hopefully we are. Otherwise, I'm lost. I'm not honestly sure which one you're talking about. If you can find it in the monster manual and let me know what its name is, then I will track it down and I'll talk about it. All right. Not too many questions about monsters coming up. So I'm going to switch over to another one that I've used quite a lot, and that is the ghost. Ghosts are often creatures that you come across, or undead creatures that you come across in sort of undead locations. If you're playing the Curse of Strahd, you're probably going to come across quite a few of them. Yeah, I'm in the monster manual and actually don't have my book on me. That's why I was asking. Sorry, I won't be able to flip through. My suggestion is put the name of the monster in the comments after the live stream and we can come back to it and do another. I mean, I will probably do monster tactics more than once. Yankee. Okay, we'll get to the Yankee. Absolutely, Tommy, we'll do that. I haven't used the Yankee that much. In fact, I'm just trying to think if I've used them at all. I might struggle with that one, but we're going to talk about the ghosts because I've used ghosts quite a lot. I'm running the Curse of Strahd, so there's heaps and heaps of ghosts. Now, ghosts don't necessarily just attack anybody, and they don't necessarily have to reveal themselves. If you have a look on page 147 of the Monster Manual, it gives you a fairly good rundown on a ghost. And of course, the one thing that stands out with the ghost, which I'll talk about shortly, is possession. Possession is one of those things that is probably the most fun for a dungeon master and the least amount of fun for a player character, and certainly for the players full stop, simply because you wind up taking over their body. But it's also a fairly low DC. So first off, unless you've got a magical weapon, it's not really going to be very effective against a ghost. It's incorporeal, so it doesn't really take an awful lot of damage. It's got ethereal sight, so it can see 60 feet, okay, into the ethereal plane, and it can move through objects. Incorporeal movement means it can move through objects, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it won't take damage. It has to get clear of that before it's going to be effective. What this means is that trying to make a perception check to spot a ghost is almost pointless, because a ghost can put itself behind total cover and it doesn't have to make any noise, and chances are it is unlikely to make noise, and then just move through a solid object and engage a creature. Awesome. So you're probably always going to get surprised with a ghost. Yeah, sounds bad, right? Okay. Jack, you said, I like the Yankee. I've run them before. They are a good challenge. We'll get to that very shortly. So, first thing, it's got a withering touch, but that's not the most fun thing to do. Withering touch is all very well. You'll find with most ghosts, if they're really evil and aggressive and they want to harm the player's characters, that they're probably going to go straight for possession. Otherwise, there's an opportunity to forget about engaging in combat and have a conversation with a ghost. If they start getting nasty with the ghost, the attacks probably won't do very much damage, and it can just move through a solid object and it's gone. Really? Move through a solid object. Good luck trying to find that ghost after that. And as I said, it doesn't necessarily have to show itself. It's one of those things where ghosts aren't always visible. They're more likely to be visible at night, or in a location that's dark, or in a place that it's specifically haunting. And they're usually tied to a location. Ghosts don't normally Miranda around. They're usually fixed location, which means that fleeing for them is really not really an option, but they don't necessarily need to be visible to the player's characters. Okay, so there's an ability here. Etherealness. The ghost enters the ethereal plane from the material plane, or vice versa. It is invisible on the material plane. So this is what I'm talking about. Okay? This is the most sensible thing to do. you use that when it needs to flee, because it can't really flee its location, it's bound to that location, so use that instead. The horrifying visage is all very nice, and I suppose you could do that. It sort of brings back images of that first scene where the Ghostbusters come across the Liberian, and they try to communicate and then decide to go, "Get her!" And she freaks them out by doing this horrible sort of facial contortion. But possession is much more interesting. The DC is not very high, so it can fail. And if they fail, the chances are, particularly if you get into a fight, the ghost is just going to whip off. It doesn't necessarily need to hang around. I think that's probably the best way to see it. Most ghosts, even if they defeat the ghost, will come back later on. You know, you can destroy a ghost, but as the Ghostbusters would say, it's a repeater. One of those ghosts, it's a repeater. You know, you destroy it and it just reappears later on. All right, so get Yankee. Let's just have a drink of water. Get Yankee. Get. Gotta find it. Gotta flip to my pages. Get. Oh man, that's one I want to talk about. Definitely want to talk about the gibbering mouth for some time. Oh, I like aberrations. Always have. Okay, the Gith Yankee. Now there's an awful lot of information on them. The astral plane or astral sea is quite a common location to find these things, but you're also going to find them at other locations. I don't think, given the detail of the Gith Yankee and the amount of information that's here, that I can do that justice in a live stream. You know, they've got multiple attacks with usually a weapon. Some of them have got innate spell casting abilities. I feel like this is actually quite a complicated thing to actually deal with. My first impression with Githyanki is that with multiple attack, that might be the first opening that sort of appeals to you, but maybe you should look very carefully at their spells and decide on the best course of action based on the spells they have available, because often spells are much more of a game changer than swinging a great sword or any kind of weapon. So I wouldn't necessarily go straight with the weapon attacks, only if they're not capable of casting spells. If they're capable of casting spells, I would use those. And often you'll find them on a ship. Githyanki are, I would say, like pirates. Oh, what do we got here? They are good challenge. Yes, they are. All good. Let's talk Eye of the Beholder, maybe. Okay. I have experience with the Beholder, so we can talk about the Beholder. I'm going to tell you a little story before I start talking about the Beholder. Trust me, it's a really good story. I was running an adventure called Beyond the Magic Mirror. It's basically Gary Gygax taking Alice in Wonderland's Through the Looking Glass, taking that adventure and turning it into a Dungeons and Dragons adventure. So I was running that, and I decided to include in this place, because it was such a crazy location, that what I would do is I would have a gazebo. I wanted to have a gazebo, seriously, and I thought, well, what's the most sensible thing I could reskin as a gazebo? And I thought the Beholder. The Beholder just struck me as being the best option. And my particular Beholder was called Gary. And they came across this Beholder. It didn't look like a Beholder. It looked like a gazebo. Okay, but I ran it like that. So they went over to this particular gazebo, tried to rest, and they found that it was in a bad mood, and I started talking with it. And one of my characters, players' characters in the group, decided that they would chat it up and try to have an intimate relationship with it. That didn't go down very well, and in fact it went horrible. They wound up getting zapped by its eyes. I had eye stalks appear out of the gazebo roof, and pretty much it cooked trees and a Trent that they summoned, and or had a friend of some kind. It's a long time. Okay, so it messed them up really bad, but they refused to go away and leave the gazebo alone, which, as I said, is actually a beholder. So they come back, and this time the players do a lot better job of actually convincing the gazebo that they are friends. And one of the characters decides to sleep with the gazebo and rub oil into it to help put it to sleep. And once it's rubbed enough oil into it, it picks the time when it's fallen asleep and then sets it alight. So we wound up with Greg the gazebo, who was actually a beholder, being burnt alive by one of the characters who tried to have an intimate relationship with the gazebo. It's a very strange story. Hopefully it was... Maybe I wasn't very good at the punchline on this, but I thought it was hilarious at the time. Okay, let's get to the beholder, which should be pretty easy to find. Nope, keep going. Beholder, no, beholders. Beholders, one of those things where you just... I always find myself really concerned that I will take out the party with a beholder. But that doesn't seem to necessarily happen, not unless you are dealing with a much higher level beholder than the party can cope with. You know, they do have those rays and so forth on them, but you know, I always found they were a little bit lackluster unless I sort of picked the opportunity where the party was a little bit lower level. Maybe it's just me and my low rolls. Okay, I could be wrong. Okay, so we're actually turning to page 28 of the Monster Manual for the Beholder. Okay, so the first thing you'll notice with the Beholder, really high armor class, relatively hard to hit. They don't have a land speed movement, they float only 20 feet, okay? They can float around and fly 20 feet, which means they're not running away. There's no chance you can have this thing run away, it's just not practical. They've got enough hit points to last a few rounds, and they are immune to being prone, which makes perfect sense because it's got no feet, okay? Dark vision, what they tend to do with a beholder, unless you have a community of beholders, which truthfully I think would be absolutely frightening, because there would be quite a few clashes, I would imagine. They're not exactly the nicest and the easiest to get along with. They tend to sort of hang out alone, but they will have thralls, minions, things that they have forced into servitude around them to help them. So they don't have to flee. They can usually use their minions to block their escape. So if they have to flee, that would be the most sensible thing to do, is have their minions engage, and then they try to escape. And they would probably have something like a panic room, a location that's actually very hard for anybody else to get into. Remember too, they can fly, so they don't have to fly along the ground, they can go up. And if you start going up, really now you're down to using ranged attacks to hit this thing if it flees. It has a bite, and I wouldn't even bother with the bite. Okay, Volo's Guide has a Beholder Lair example, I believe. Yes, it does. I mean, if you want me to open that up, I can, but I'm just using the monster tactics for a Beholder right now, and I'm using the Monster Manual. If you want me to open up Volo's Guide, I can, but right now I'm just going to work with that. So it makes ray attacks, I-ray attacks, and with your I-ray attacks, they're random. You simply roll. You get 3, and you select your targets. I wouldn't even bother going with being random about who you hit, because it's pretty smart. It's not a stupid creature. It's got an intelligence of 17, so it's well learned. I put mine in libraries and places of learning where there's lots of information, and where it's going to pretty much be left alone, so it can connive and try to force its will on the population around it. So yeah, that's what I would do, is put it in a nice fortified location. It's also got a high wisdom, so not only is it intelligent, it's pretty smart, it's wise enough. Xanathar is a beholder, I think. Yes, he absolutely is. And if I had Xanathar's Guide, we could talk about Xanathar, but unfortunately I don't. Sorry. So you have the Charm Ray, you have the Paralyzing Ray, the Fear Ray. I always find the Fear Ray to be a bit lackluster. When I roll up a Fear Ray, it's like, I don't really want them to run away. That's not really my goal. What I want to do is really scare the bejesus out of them. It also has a slowing ray, which, as I said, I don't really like either. I mean, I suppose it has some effect that's sort of debuffing the characters. The ones that I like the most are definitely got to be sleep, petrification, and disintegration. Charming ray is all very well. Paralyzing just sort of puts them out of commission for a short period of time. Charming can be useful, but the ones that are really scary is disintegration, petrification, and the sleep ray. Now the sleep ray, unfortunately, if you have a look at the sleep ray, a targeted creature must succeed on a DC 16 wisdom saving throw or fall asleep and remain unconscious for 1 minute. The problem with saving throws, and they aren't really that hard for high level characters to be successful with, and if you've got a paladin and they've got auras, then other things are making that much harder for you to be effective with that. My suggestion to you is don't forget the legendary actions, because it says here you get to use one eye ray. Now it doesn't state that you have to randomly select the eye ray, so you can pick the one that you feel is going to be the most effective. So if you want to try and disintegrate them, the DC is essentially the same no matter what you're using. Still a 16, whether it's a strength saving throw, wisdom saving throw, or anything else. But I would go with disintegration. Disintegration is still going to do some fairly significant things to your characters. Petrification's pretty scary too. And you can use the innovation ray. I don't really use the innovation ray that much. I just feel like it's not as scary as the option to disintegrate the characters, particularly if you can get them down to 0 hit points. Now, where have I put my beholders? My beholders usually are, like I said, in a library location, a fortified location, and usually they won't necessarily try to kill the characters straight away. There's usually going to be some dialogue, and most of that dialogue is going to revolve around trying to force them into servitude or expecting them to be manual labor or servants, bring food to the beholder, drink, stuff like that. Do its basic menial chores. If you can get your characters to sort of work with that, that's great. If they want to start engaging it in combat, they can. I tend to find my beholders work best though if I engage them in a conversation so they can have some sort of discussion before combat breaks out. It's really only a matter of time before combat will break out with a beholder, because it will try to force its will in some way eventually, if they start refusing to do something, onto the player's characters. Was that sufficient for the beholder? I feel like that's just sort of, this is off the top of my head, so there's nothing prepared for the beholder. I'm just working on what I know and what I've done with my beholders in the past. My general opinion is the bite is useless, and I would always go with the raise if I can, simply because it does more. A lot more fun too. You're welcome, Tommy. Okay, so we're going to just about wrap it up here. We've almost been going for an hour. So what I want to say about Monster Tactics, just to finish up for this session, is I will probably do more Monster Tactics. I've been spending a bit of time where I can writing up some notes on them. I'm supposed to be doing a Dungeon Master workshop on Horde of the Dragon Queen next weekend, but because I'm having to look for work, I'm actually struggling to find time to prepare all that material, and therefore you might have noticed I've been doing a lot of live stream. A lot of the stuff hasn't got a lot of content behind it, and that's simply because, one, I'm struggling in my head with the concept that I'm going to be unemployed shortly. Two, I actually have to spend a lot of my spare time, which I used to spend preparing my videos and writing notes, on looking for work, which is why you're not getting quite as much information necessarily from me as you used to, and where you're not getting videos that are pre-prepared, shot on my Canon camera and where I'm using my phone rather than my Canon camera. You might notice if I move my head that my camera is set up, so I will be doing some shooting very shortly where the video quality will be better, the sound will be better. I have promised to go and get a webcam. I do have the money. It's just, as I said, getting time to go out and do that. Yesterday I tried to live stream our Friday night D&D session. The quality is not that great. I can't increase the quality because I'm going from my home to somebody else's home, and carting around my computer is impossible. I don't have a laptop that would allow me to do that, and I don't have a webcam that will allow me to do that. So for now, everything in terms of the D&D, Friday night D&D, is going to be on my phone, just for now. It might change, but I'm not promising anything. The other thing with your monsters is have a really good look at that website that I talked about, themonstersknow.com. He does have some good advice there, and it's certainly a starting point. I just wouldn't say it's a finishing point. You don't have to run the monsters the way I have presented them in my videos or even in those articles. You can do it a different way. Just trying to give you some ideas about how to do it so it works a bit better for you. Not always are you going to have monsters doing exactly the right thing. You won't always find a Hydra in a watery lair. You won't always find your beholder in a library or a fortified location. So you can break the mold with any of those things. You don't have to follow my advice regarding any of that. Now, I've got no more questions regarding different creatures. Probably wouldn't matter because we're pretty much out of time. I'm going to finish up there. Look, if you found this video helpful or informative, please share, like, and subscribe. I'm going to shout out right now to everybody who is sharing my videos. Man, I can't believe the amount of shares that I've been getting over the month. It's been awesome. It's meant that me sharing on Facebook is almost pointless because you guys are doing a better job of it than I could possibly do. And what I'm noticing, I think what's happening is that not only are players watching the stuff that's related to them, but the Dungeon Masters are forwarding the videos related to the players' stuff to the players so that they watch this stuff, which is really fantastic. And when the Dungeon Masters are getting information that I'm presenting to them, they're watching that and sharing that probably with other friends who are Dungeon Masters. That is what I think is going on. It's been awesome. So I have to thank everybody for supporting my channel, for watching my stuff. It's really been a big boost mentally for me. Now, in the comments, if you have any questions on monsters or you want a particular tactic on a monster discussed, and the Yankee will obviously be something I have to do some notes on, and we'll get back to that. I will certainly do that. Just put it in the comments. I usually get to all of my comments eventually. Sometimes it takes me a little bit longer than others. And I'm going to say my final sign out, and that is, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.